All right, we're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. My name is Pal. This is Conscientious Omnivore. It's been a while. I think I took the longest break of my YouTube career so far. Mute myself because I was getting crazy feedback. Anyway, yeah, it feels good to be back. Sorry for leaving everybody hanging. I've had a few people kind of inquiring about my, I guess, well-being. It's been quite a while, and yeah, I've been really busy. So maybe just a quick update before we get into it today. I'm going to be doing another vegan, views and news kind of broadcast, and I actually have to kind of hurry up because I really need to get out of here like in maybe an hour-ish. So I'll try and go through these items really fast today. But yeah, long story short, I just had really couple crazy weeks. I had one of my oldest and dearest friends visiting from the U.S. So he was here for like almost a week, and he and I go way back, like one of my buddies from college, and yeah, it was just great hanging out. And I really didn't have time to post stuff and make videos during that time. So I didn't really even get to do. I kind of wanted to let people know that I was going to be off for a few days, but then I didn't really get to do that before he arrived. And then after he left, I pretty much had gotten sick. I had like some kind of throat infection. So my throat was killing me. And for like a few days, it was like really painful to talk. And I had like a really raspy voice. I'm still not 100% like over it, but I feel pretty good now. So I kind of missed a bunch of days for that. And then also it's just been kind of difficult timing wise. I've been trying to get into a new kind of like habit, and it's been difficult, and we've had a lot of stuff going on with the house. And so anyway, long story short, I'll stop making excuses. I'm back now. Hopefully you should have some more regular content coming at you guys pretty soon. I have a lot of ideas, and in the meantime, I'm gonna start in with today's vegan news and views. Hey Leon, thanks a lot. It's good to be back. Hopefully, if anybody missed me, you could have watched some of the back catalog if anybody hasn't seen like all my videos yet. I don't think anybody has seen all of my videos yet, because there's quite a few up there now. So anyway, if I ever go away like this again, maybe just go through the back catalog. All right, let me share my screen, and we will start up with the news. Let's see. This is where I'm going to share. Perfect. And there we go. All right. Hopefully you guys can see the screen. Wanted to start off with just something really light. I've got a ton of articles and news bits to go through today, so I'll be going really fast. This was just kind of like a feel-good article, and it ties into something I was talking about in the last couple of news live streams. There's basically, this group of kids in New Jersey in the United States. They basically got it in their heads that they wanted to get a official state reptile, and they didn't have one in New Jersey, and they picked this endangered turtle. I forget exactly what type it is, but anyway, the kids did all this research, and they found out how to petition their lawmakers, and they actually got this to pass. And I thought this was really cool. Kind of goes counter to some of the kind of pessimistic views I guess I have about politics, and hopefully it kind of encourages people that you can affect change. I know this is kind of like just a feel-good thing, like whether or not they make this the state animal, it probably doesn't change the fact that the habitat for this particular turtle is kind of endangered, and that's they need more space. But at least it brings awareness that people can affect the change, and that they should try. And I thought it was great that kids had this effect, and they really got to study more about animals, and pick out something that they felt like they could impact in their community. So I thought this was a really cool article to share. And then one thing that I thought was very interesting that they talked about, and it's kind of weird and very much not vegan, is that it says different states may share a common symbol because it's important to each. For example, Maryland and Virginia are among at least 20 states honoring milk as their state beverage. So it's just like, I thought that was pretty kind of odd that milk would be a state beverage, but I guess no more odd than anything else that people eat or drink, but just something that was kind of funny. So so yeah, I think, you know, the positive message of this is that, yeah, kids are getting engaged in you know, the law making process, and also learning about animals and finding out that, you know, this turtle is endangered, and that the, you know, the bog you know, habitat that it dwells in needs to be protected as well. So I thought that was cool. All right, moving on. I'm going to have a couple of ocean themed articles like I've had in the past few sessions as well. So Sea Shepherd is a wonderful organization. In case anybody isn't familiar with it, they do a lot of things trying to bring awareness to protecting fish and the sea environment and pollution and all this kind of stuff. They do a lot of anti-whaling things. And in this case, they were undertaking a, you know, basically like a campaign to remove a whole bunch of illegal fishing lines and nets and, you know, these kind of like floating kind of improvised fishing devices. This was in the Mediterranean off the, this is the Aeolian Islands. And they worked with local authorities to, yeah, to basically patrol and remove these illegal, they're called FADs. So what is that? Fishing aggregating devices. And these are illegal. They were not supposed to be there. They were put out in times when there was supposed to be a ban on fishing. I think it was due to like breeding seasons and things like that, where like the fish were particularly vulnerable. And you know, they were able to remove a whole bunch of these. As you can see from the pictures, I mean, it's a huge amount of plastic waste. We talked about this before in some of the previous you know, broadcasts, and you can just really see the huge impact that you know, even just off the coast of one small little island, like just how much plastic is out there. And this is just the stuff that was, you know, collected that was illegally placed there. You can only imagine how much more stuff is there legally in other times of the year and all this kind of stuff. So this is an interesting article if anybody wants to read through it. But you know, they talk about you know, some of the other campaigns they've done. And I just thought this was nice to see that they're getting props from the local authorities. So they clearly appreciate it, and they said that they don't even have the ability to patrol all the coastline that they have. So they were actually happy to get the help from Sea Shepherd. So I just thought I'd share that. And this next one is an interesting one. This comes from the Sea Voice News site. They basically are talking about the effects of acidification on the ocean. And what they said was that with the carbon dioxide that's going into the atmosphere, that actually also makes the sea more acidic. And that can negatively impact the shells of the, you know, various like mollusks and, you know, other things that live in the ocean. So these animals, they create their sea shells from calcium, I believe, and the calcium is you know, basically dissolved by the acid. So the more acidic the water, the harder it is for them to maintain their proper shell thickness, and in order to grow, they need to be able to grow their shells as well. So they looked at some area in Japan where there's a higher than normal kind of level of CO2, because these are bubbling up from the volcanic vents, as you can see here, and it has basically created a more acidic environment. And they found that the length, I guess, of the shells was you know, shortened. So it went down from 178 millimeters to 112. It also exposed body tissues, and it caused the shells to dissolve in some cases. And what they're saying is that by studying this area with kind of like a naturally higher CO2 level because of the volcanic vents, and comparing it to other areas of the ocean that don't have those high levels, they're able to kind of see and kind of make some predictions about what kind of impact the further acidification of ocean levels in other areas will have on these kinds of things. And as we, you know, have talked about many times before, many of these environments are critically, you know, endangered to begin with. So having, you know, further impact to them is definitely not a good thing. And also just the interconnectedness of all animal life, really. You know, you don't want to impact the you know, the smallest little things, including like the little mollusks and other animals that sometimes use these shells as homes, like crabs and other kinds of things like that. So I thought that was pretty you know, kind of scary and not good to hear about. Another little bit of Sea Shepherd news. I've talked about before, like I love seeing when you find out somebody that you like, or kind of just think well of, that they are doing something positive. And I would say I'm a casual fan of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and they were actually posting a picture of this like Sea Shepherd towel to their Instagram page. And I guess it's not the first time they've shown support for Sea Shepherd. And this picture got a bunch of likes. I forget, they talk about it in the article here, something like 80,000 thumbs up or whatever on their picture. But I guess back in 2013, it says the band promoted Sea Shepherd Day at Big Day Out, an Australian music festival. While the band performed, Sea Shepherd logos and images flashed on the big screens in front of 90,000 attendees. So this is great. Oh yeah, here it is, 83,000 likes. This simple Instagram post has reached nearly the same amount of people, demonstrating the power of social media and the artist's influence. So I just think, it's a great testament to social media, like we always hear about. If the mainstream media doesn't cover things, sometimes people can get directly to their fans through Instagram or Facebook or whatever, YouTube, and you can reach a lot of people. I mean, these guys have a huge influence, and the fact that they support a good organization like Sea Shepherd, I think is great. So yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. And now on to some kind of bad news. There was a mad cow disease case discovered in Scotland, in the past, what is this, 2 weeks or so, week and a half. And, they're, of course, trying to alleviate the concerns that people might have by hearing about this. But they're basically saying it's an isolated case, and, look at how well our, testing standards worked, that they found these, that they found this cow and before it got into the food chain and all this kind of stuff. And just on a personal note about mad cow disease, it was like one of the things that actually got me to stop eating beef for the longest time back in the day when I was very much a meat eater. There was like a period of years where I just didn't eat any kind of beef. I was afraid of getting mad cow disease, and this was kind of like back in the, I guess, like the 90s when the big scare was going on around. And I remember reading at that time, and I was very upset that the testing that they have in the U.S. was so small, percentage wise from the number of cows killed, that I remember just as a consumer of of beef, thinking that wow, I don't feel safe eating that at all. And I just remember being very upset, and I would see things like, in Japan, I believe they tested every cow that was slaughtered for mad cow disease. And in the US, it was something like 1 out of every 10,000 would be tested. And in Europe, I think it was something like 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 5, something like that. It was way higher. And I just think testing 1 out of every 10,000 is probably just, there's so many chances for diseased cows to go through into the the food supply, that it's incredibly unsafe. And I still think that's the case. And I think when you read these kind of articles and you just kind of look at the language, it's very clearly kind of worded to try and kind of they're acknowledging there's this problem, but they're trying to put this spin on it to make it sound like it's cool, the testing is great, we found it. And they were actually petitioning, I guess, in Scotland to get the whatever this is, negligible risk status. So I guess there's different statuses that you can get as a cattle producing area, depending on when the last animal was found with the disease. So it's kind of crazy that people just still don't realize that this is a very serious problem, and it's not gone away. So it's still getting caught every once in a while. But I thought that was pretty interesting. There was another huge recall that I also wanted to share with you guys. This was the world's biggest meat company recalling 7 million pounds of beef. Now, this is not for mad cow disease. It's just for some other contamination. I can't remember. Yeah, it was salmonella and listeria. Basically, as this article points out, well, this is clearly on, vegan biased news, vegnews.com, but it said, actress Ruby Rose urges everyone to ditch meat altogether. And really, I mean, that is your only real safe option. As long as people want to consume meat and they use, 97% or whatever it is of the stats show that people are consuming, factory farmed animals, this is what you're going to get, because that is what drives these, these companies, is profit motivation. And they, they get more money by getting more animals into smaller and smaller spaces. Oh yeah, there's no more to the article. It's just really that. So anyway, I don't even know who Ruby Rose is, but I think that's great, whoever she is. And she was telling people to go vegan. So who's this lady? Ruby Rose, I don't know. Shark After Dark recap. Anyway, so I think that's great. Next, a bunch of good news is kind of in the plant meat, kind of market areas. So they're showing that Beyond Meat is set to become the first vegan meat producer to launch an IPO. So they're going to get publicly traded and get a whole bunch of other investors, and people can buy in, I guess, like once it's traded on the stock market. And they talk about some of the backers they've had, and some of the high-profile people like Bill Gates and Leonardo DiCaprio, and Tyson Foods has bought into them, and all this kind of stuff. And they talk about some of the growth that they've seen, and I just think it's great that these plant-based meat alternatives are just doing so well, because I really think that is the only way that we can affect changes. We keep getting people who aren't even vegan just to eat this stuff instead of eating animals, all the better. So they talk about this other company here. It says Impossible Foods recently doubled production to meet demand. And then they talk about No Evil Foods, a North Carolina-based startup, just expanded its distribution to 250 Walmart stores. And there's Tesco versions and all this other kind of stuff. So it's great. Next one. Beyond Sushi will be the first vegan restaurant to appear on Shark Tank. Now, Shark Tank is a reality show, if I understand it right. I don't watch it, but I think it's like you could have like a small business, and you go in front of this panel of philanthropists or whatever, like people with a bunch of money, and then they have like a pitch of your sales, your sales pitch to them of like your business idea, and then if they like it, they give you funding, and then you can go off and do your thing. And so for this show, this company Beyond Sushi will be the first vegan restaurant to appear on the show, and they're going to be talking about their vegan sushi and how they want to expand and all this kind of stuff. And it's great. So they are also talking about in this article, here it is, other vegan companies that have appeared on Shark Tank. So they say vegan apple-based honey company Bee Free Honey, dessert hummus brand Delighted by Hummus, and DIY cinnamon roll chain Cinnaholic. So it's great. I think just the more and more people know about this kind of stuff, and anybody watching this show, if they're not vegan and they see this, they're like, oh wow, I didn't know you can get vegan sushi, and maybe it gets them thinking. So I think just the more mainstream, the better. Next one up is Dominos is trialing vegan supreme cheese pizzas in the UK. I think they already did this in Australia, if I remember right. I don't know if anybody's watching can confirm that, maybe, but I'm pretty sure they did do that, and I just don't remember. But yeah, basically, just another thing. Oh yeah, here it is. Follows the successful launch of vegan cheese options at Domino's Australia and New Zealand. So it's great. They're doing more and more stuff, and I think when you get people to realize that you can just get vegan versions of whatever you want, whether that's pizza or sushi or burgers, then it just makes it that much easier. And as I've said in many videos already, if you just all you need to do is move your hand a few inches down the aisle, then it's great. It says Domino's launched this vegan pizza in the Netherlands a while ago. Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, it's just great. I think there's 2 vegan pizza option places here in Budapest as well. I actually have to go try one of the new ones. I haven't seen it up until recently when I went to the Vegan Sunday Market. I didn't even know about it. So I'm going to have to go check that out. No problem, Leon. Get on it and let me know how it is. Next one, more vegan options added to restaurants at Universal Studios. So again, just, you know, they're going to have various vegan meat options on their menu. So they're going to have options by Impossible Foods, Beyond Meat, Gardein, and Follow Your Heart at 7 restaurants. So they're saying how they felt pressure, I guess, because, yeah, here it is. When comparing our choices to parks like Disney and to see some of the amazing creations shared in Veg Disney by their culinary team, we had a hard time understanding why Universal wasn't as hospitable to their guests. This was according to some blog or something on a Facebook group. So basically, you know, their customers, people going to, you know, Universal Studios, they pressured them and said, like, look, man, Disney's got vegan options for us. Why can't you give us some? And then they did. And this is how I think, you know, things are changing slowly but surely, and it's really great. So they're talking about Disney Japan has vegan sushi and rice, and Canada has, what is this, Mickey Mouse pasta, as well as Beyond Burger and Gardein vegan chicken patties. So it's like, yeah, it's just becoming more and more common. All right, some health options or stories for you guys. This one is basically a recent study showing how a vegan diet decreases your chance of colon cancer. And then they also talked about another study showing that paleo and keto diets show an increase. So they're basically, you know, just kind of highlighting what hopefully most of the people watching should already know, that, yeah, like eating, you know, red meat especially increases your risk of colon cancer, especially processed meat, but red meat as well. And the World Health Organization back in 2015 also said that red meat, even unprocessed red meat, is a likely carcinogen. So it's like one level down from a known carcinogen. And more and more studies are beginning to show this. And here this says a dietitian wrote in an article for the U.S. News and World Report at the beginning of the year, the ketogenic diet is a textbook example of a high cancer risk dietary pattern. She noted it's very high in animal fat in general and red meat in particular, and very low in fiber-rich fruits, vegetables, beans, and whole grains. So they basically said, yeah, you know, basically everyone, not just older people, need to take the health risks of following these kinds of diets more seriously. Colon cancer is not just something that happens to grandparents. It increasingly affects their millennial grandchildren as well. And on a serious note, I can also kind of vouch for this, that you know, one of my friends, his brother actually had a scare and had to get a polyp removed, and the guy is like way younger than me. Like I think he's maybe like 30. I can't remember his exact age, but young guy. And you know, it's not the only person I know. There's another friend, same thing, had to get, you know, a section of his intestine, or no, sorry, not his intestine, of his yeah, of his colon removed because of, you know, basically a cancerous polyp that was found. So yeah, scary stuff. Definitely pays to stick to the whole grains and the greens and fruits and veggies. This is another study that just came out as well, and it shows a decrease in chance of breast cancer. So for women, breast cancer is the most common cancer, I believe. And at least if I remember right, that is for the US, and I'm pretty sure it's probably for other areas of the world as well. And you know, they basically are talking about research that they are going to be doing at the Thomas M. Campbell Medical, that's Dr. Thomas M. Campbell, medical director of the hospital's weight management center, said, to my knowledge, we have never had a nutrition intervention comprised of a whole dietary shift in advanced cancer patients in any type of cancer. They're going to be doing a, you know, basically a study where they're going to try and show that a dietary change to a whole food plant-based diet can help, you know, slow this down. And they have a whole bunch of good information as to why, you know, it's likely to work. And this is what I want to say, T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies made the grant donation for this study. So they donated $1.5 million to do this study. And they're going to hopefully show exactly how powerful the treatment is with whole food plant-based diet. So this is going to be an interesting one. Okay, this is a kind of sad story about trophy hunting. There was this guy who is a warden, I think. What was he? Game commissioner, sorry, Idaho Fish and Game Commissioner Blake Fisher. He came under fire for posting and emailing, I guess, a bunch of pictures of himself when he went on a African trophy hunting safari, where he basically killed like a whole family of baboons. You can see the adult baboon here and its babies, and a whole bunch of other animals that he killed there as well, and posted pictures of, you know, his gloating, smiling face. And after public pressure, he got fired. So I think that's great. He should have gotten fired. I think anybody in today's day and age, especially when you're working for, you know, a government position, it's not even a private company. Like, you have to be a little bit smarter about what you're doing on social media and what kind of idiotic things you're posting. But you know, I think this is just goes to show you that, like, a lot of people nowadays are thankfully, you know, pretty opposed to, you know, trophy hunting, and especially for animals that are somewhat endangered or rare. Most people are against that, and there's unfortunately a lot of animals that aren't, you know, on the list of endangered species yet, but they are getting close to that, like giraffes, and they are still hunted as well. So it's very kind of like sad news, but in a way, I'm kind of happy to see that at least the guy got fired. So Ray Slater says he should get rehired and then fired again just to get his hopes up. Yeah, hopefully he has to learn his lesson and then not do anything stupid like this and give up trophy hunting and hunting of all type, because there's no point. Tesco doubling their vegan food range as a demand for plant-based food soars, and they also talked about some other companies that have had to increase their production. I think there was a thing with I think it was Costco had to basically, like, they sold out of all the plant-based burgers that they did, and so it's great to see this kind of stuff. I love seeing headlines like this, and you know, this is just on the Mirror. You know, news portal. It's a UK news site, and you can see here, yeah, they soared by a massive 25%, helping to swell the UK meat free market to £310 million. That's an awful lot of money. So that's great, and they're basically saying they're going to, you know, double their food range, so they're going to have more and more options. So yeah, hopefully, if like you know, anybody's into kind of like pre-made stuff or frozen things, you'll see more and more stuff there that you can just buy. Okay, next, more options at Earls restaurants. They're going to have a vegan menu, and I think this was saying, oh, it's going to be 100% vegan. Yeah, so that's great. I don't know this dining chain, but they are going to switch to a 100% vegan plant-based menu in North America. So I think that is fantastic. And let's see, what does it say? They've been working on this menu for the past 2 years, which made its debut at 12 select locations. And yeah, it's great. So I don't think the whole restaurant is going to go vegan, if I remember right. I think it's just that they're vegan, like they're going to have a vegan menu that's all vegan. Yes. They're going to have a plant-based menu at all locations. So that's the change, is that before they were only having this in a small kind of like location, 12 places, and now they're going to have it offered in all of their locations. So I think that's great. Next, vegan pizza was crowned the best in the UK at a national awards ceremony. So this was at the beginning of the month of October. And this vegan pizza maker was deemed the best pizza in the UK. So, you know, again, I just think, like, kudos to them for making up a great recipe that obviously non-vegan pizzas were in the running, and this beat all of them. So I just think that's really fantastic. And yeah, there's an interesting thing here. It says in 2016, the number of vegans in the UK was estimated to be around 540,000, and they're saying that it's likely to be much higher now, just because there are so many more people identifying as vegan in the UK. So I think this is more great news. This pizza looks great. I would definitely want some. This I kind of wanted to highlight. There's somebody I follow on Twitter. His name is Peter Egan. Apparently, he is an actor. I don't watch this show. I don't know if I don't even know if it's a show or like a theater production. I have no idea. But it says Downtown Abbey actor, and it's about Peter Egan. He blasts the new Bear Gorillas attraction, which is basically you pay money and you can go swim in the tank with sharks and all this kind of stuff. And he rightfully points out that this experience is just really kind of like a hokey way to get a bunch of money off of people, and you're really confining these poor animals to life in a tank. And what you don't realize, I guess, like unless you kind of learn about this a little bit, is that for these fish, it's the equivalent of, like, say, putting somebody in a bathtub. Like, it's not like enough space for them. They don't get to move around. And it's just disgraceful that in today's day and age, like these kind of prisons are there for people's entertainment, as opposed to just leaving the the sharks and the other fish in their native environment, and people can just go scuba dive there directly. So yeah, this is the guy, Peter Egan. So I like him on Twitter too. Check him out if anybody's on Twitter. He's got really great posts about animal and environmental issues. So definitely check him out, and hopefully they get people to realize to not support these kind of attractions, these animal exploitation attractions, and then hopefully they get shut down because nobody goes and nobody pays for them. This article I actually got from Peter's tweets, I think. I'm pretty sure, actually. This is a very interesting article. They talk about the kind of like genetic like evolutionary losses that we're experiencing by all the different animals that are becoming extinct or are in danger of becoming extinct due to climate change and human impact on the environment, like cutting down the rainforests and all this kind of stuff. They're basically saying that we are now in the middle of the 6th mass extinction of life on Earth. They're basically saying that it is definitely propelled by human destruction of wildlife, and 83% of wild mammals have already gone. So they're talking about large mammals. There's some interesting things in the article here where they talk about the megafauna. So that's like animals that are above a certain size. I can't remember what that is. It might be like 25 kilograms or something. And they're talking about just, how much evolutionary history is being lost by the, destruction of these animals. So here's a kind of like good, summary of kind of some of this article. It basically says what they did was they looked at not just the number of the lost species, as this fails to capture how unique each species is in evolutionary terms. They tried to basically map out the species, almost like the branches of a tree. And it said the researchers added up the amount of time each lost species had spent evolving since it emerged, a measure called phylogenetic diversity. There are hundreds of species of shrew, for example, but just 2 species of elephant. Losing elephants would therefore be like chopping a large branch off the tree of life, says Davis, whereas losing a shrew species would be like trimming off a small twig. So both are bad, but in terms of evolutionary change, one is clearly more kind of like impactful than the other. So it says from Mighty Duke, yeah. I just don't understand, like, in today's day and age, why somebody would think it's cool to like go swim in a like basically a small tank with sharks. It's just crazy. I think it's just like bragging rights or something. They want to take a selfie. So they're basically saying from the rise of modern humans to the year 1500, 2 billion years of evolutionary history was lost due to mammal extinctions. 2 billion years. I mean, that is just hard to wrap your mind around. And they're basically saying since 1500, so in the past, like, whatever that is, 500 years roughly, we've lost 500 million years more. If the current high rate of extinctions continues for 50 years, a further 1.8 billion years of phylogenetic diversity will disappear. So, I mean, just really kind of scary stuff in this article. I definitely encourage everybody to read this. It had very interesting things they talk about. the methodology for how they were putting this study together, and they talked about, you know, some other kind of research that had been done that was similar, and why this was different. And you know, they're saying that some of this genetic diversity may come back if like people were to stop doing what they're doing and allow it to come back, but it would take like billions of years to be reversed. So I can't remember where it was in the article where they talk about that, but it's just some astronomical figure. 5 to 7 million years for the natural world to recover. And what they're saying is we've lost 2.5 billion years. So crazy. Yeah, Race, I try to keep the language kind of clean on the channel, so I'm not going to read it out loud, but I hope you don't take offense. But, well, maybe I'll read it because it's not actually a swear. So I'll say fucking carnitards. That's what Mighty Duke's comment was. So there you go. Hope you're happy, Race. And hi, Mighty Duke. All right, next one. This was a basically like a advertising campaign by Viva to basically make people in the UK more aware about the impact of the dairy industry on the lives of male calves born in the dairy industry. And as you can see here, 95,000 male calves are shot in a year, and those are from 2015 stats. And they posted these kind of things on billboards. And you can see one here where they're basically saying that in October they launched 2 giant vegan billboards to raise awareness, and they're saying that, you know, these you know, huge signs target the people driving on the M5 near Birmingham. It's going to reach hopefully over you know, 1.6 million people. So I think that's great. You know, who knows like what kind of impact these kinds of things have, and yeah, I just think it's good to see. So. Go Viva. Next, this article I want to spend a little bit of time on. This one was actually very interesting to me. It was from beginning of October. They found that in an analysis of the discharged nitrogen waste into waterways, a central Illinois pork processing plant was the worst out of the whole country. And they, you know, did an assessment of 98 large meat processing facilities, and this nonprofit group called Environmental Integrity Project, they found that this company was the worst. It is located in Beardstown, Illinois, and they are owned by the huge company JBS. I think it's a Brazilian company, if I remember right. And they put 1,850 pounds of nitrogen on an average day into the tributary of the Illinois River. So that is huge. And they also said that that is the same amount that a city would put with a population roughly the size of Evanston. Now, I wasn't familiar with Evanston, so I looked up just Evanston really quickly. They have almost 75,000 people. So on one day, these guys at this meat processing plant, and just bear in mind again that this is just one plant, it is the worst plant in the US, but they put in that much nitrogen into the waterways as a whole city of almost 5,000 people. 75,000 people would. So pretty crazy stuff. And then that wasn't really the most interesting part of the story for me. The interesting thing starts where they start going into kind of like the regulatory requirements for the amount of you know, waste that they can discharge and the amount of nitrogen that they can put into the water. They also talk about some of the kind of mishaps that have happened at this plant before. And you can see here that a Tribune investigation found that between 2005 and 2014, pollution incidents from hog confinement operations killed at least 492,000 fish and impaired 67 miles of the state's rivers, creeks, and waterways. So that's a huge number. And this company is no better. They basically talk about some incident that happened there. I think it was in 2015. Yeah, here it is. One of the lagoons failed in March 2015, and 29 million gallons of partially treated wastewater spilled into the drainage ditch near the Beardstown plant. It flowed for 2.6 miles into the Muscatine Bay. I don't know if I pronounced that right. And they're basically saying that biologists counted nearly 65,000 dead fish in that river. So it's pretty crazy. Oh yeah, here it is. Cargill owned the plant at the time, but sold it to Brazil's JBS later. So it's a Brazilian company now. And I'm pretty sure this is the same company that had the huge incident where like rotten meat was found and it got relabeled and sold. I'm pretty sure it's them. I'm not 100% sure, but I could look into that maybe separately. And the interesting thing is that this article keeps going on, and they start talking about the what do you call it? The assessment of these plants and the amount of pollution that they're releasing into the water. And what they're saying is that they haven't had a violation. They haven't exceeded their permit levels since 2016. And then I'm like, okay, well, that's kind of interesting. And they're talking about the EPA and how, what kind of fines they put out and all this kind of stuff. And they're also trying to give the version from the company where they're basically, JBS officials disputing these charges. And they're saying that, the plant is doing great and, it's working hard to make sure that they don't discharge more than they're allowed to and blah, blah, blah. And that they're not even doing it every day. And they're saying this study is misleading. And what they're saying is, we only discharged 295 days in 2017. So it's like, we didn't do it 365. We only did it 295. So what are you guys talking about? It's just crazy stuff. That's not much of a saving, grace in my mind. But then, here's the other thing. So they're saying they haven't had an incident since 2015. And then later on, if you keep reading, it says, but since October 2016, JBS has failed to submit discharge monitoring reports that are required by the Clean Water Act. So basically, this other nonprofit, Prairie River Network, this staff attorney, Kim Knowles, basically is highlighting the fact that since 2016, they have failed to submit monitoring reports. So we don't even really know what they're doing anymore. And the EPA isn't finding them, and they're just saying, oh yeah, they're within their limits. But we don't even actually know what they're doing. We're kind of taking them at their word. And here's a great quote. It says, I think we should stop sacrificing our water to prop up the meatpacking industry. And then if you keep reading further down, you start seeing kind of how these, kind of money things must all play together, because they talk to the mayor, Leslie Harris, mayor of the rural town of 5,500, said Beardstown has recovered from the devastating spill 3 years ago, and JBS has been part of the solution. Since taking ownership of the facility, JBS made repairs to the lagoons, blah, 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 and they're restocking the fish in the ponds. And then it says they've received federal funding to renovate its water treatment facility, and blah, blah, blah. Probably, again, more government subsidies. And then they're saying the vegetation is growing, the fish are there, they have corrected the problem. This is, again, the mayor saying this, Harris said. They, JBS, are doing everything they can to keep in compliance, and we appreciate their cooperation. They are very good to our community, meaning they pay some taxes into our budget, so we're not going to go and yell at them and say that they're doing anything wrong. Sorry, I'm just adding my own translation there. And then I love this part. If something wasn't right, I'm sure the Illinois EPA and the US EPA would have notified the city of Beardstown, but we've not received any notification. Now, again, bear in mind what I just read just a few moments ago, that since 2016, they haven't filed any kind of reports. So it's like, the mayor's like, oh, I'm sure if they did something wrong, the EPA would let us know. And meanwhile, you just read 2 minutes ago that actually the EPA doesn't even know what the hell they're doing. Pretty crazy. So, the mayor's describing JBS as a good corporate citizen. Yeah, it means they pay the money to the mayor to shut up and let things run the way that they've always run. Pretty crazy. They also employ 2,000 workers, by far the town's largest employer. If you think about it, the whole town is only 5,500 people. They employ half of the city, basically, if everybody lives in that city who works there, which probably isn't the case, but I'm sure a lot of them are. So they are, they are not going to speak up against their bread and butter, so to speak, because that's their probably, hugest, tax revenue and job revenue for the area. So if the state's monitoring it and they don't have any problems with it, I would like to see what the state would say about it before I make any comment. This person is very clearly paid well to keep their mouth shut. It's very frustrating reading stuff like this. I was kind of outraged while I was reading this. And then it goes on and talks about some of the violations and how they work, and by that I mean don't work. So here it is. This is a great part of the article. Even when a plant is found in violation, enforcement and penalties are rare. The Federal Clean Water Act allows courts to fine plants that pollute more than their permit allows, up to $46,129 per day for each separate violation. But the Environmental Integrity Project, that's again this nonprofit that I mentioned at the top, identified at least 18 slaughterhouses that accumulated more than 100 days of violations from 2016 to 2018, only 10 of which paid any fines at all. A Keystone protein plant in Pennsylvania, which violated discharge limits for more than 1,000 days. Think about that. It's like, what is that, 3 years basically. They paid only $1,030 since 2016. Now, my math in my head is not that good anymore, but I'm pretty sure if you multiply 1,000 days times $46,000 per day, that's going to be a lot more than $1,000. So it's just crazy, and really goes to show you just how dirty it is. And I love this kind of article because this is on MSN.com, but I sadly fear that most people would read this or not even read it, and they won't see just how dirty it is, but it's laid out. I mean, you don't really have to read between the lines. It's just very obvious. Like, these companies are basically doing whatever the heck they want and just paying everybody else to shut up and keep quiet. So, yeah, I thought this article was pretty crazy. All right, I got to move along here. Next one, this was a little bit of good news. Nearly 80% of U.S. millennials regularly eat vegan meat. So again, 80% of the millennials are not vegan, but they're eating vegan meat alternatives, which is great. And yeah, they're basically saying non-millennials, it's 50%, but even that's great. So I think even it really shows that even older people are willing to start changing and adopting and kind of trying out some of the, vegan meat options. And they talk about some of the most, most popular ones. So I guess, like they said, the Gardein Mandarin Orange Crispy Chicken Fillets is the top-selling vegan meat product. And they talk about some of the other stuff. Beyond Meat's Beastly Sliders came in third place, and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I just think, again, the more people that are eating it, the better. It hopefully starts opening their eyes to a more compassionate way of living. I talked I think it was the last one, where I said some hunter shot a bear and the bear fell off a cliff and fell on the hunter and hospitalized the guy. Here is a even more sad and tragic. Race Lover says convenience is the key. I absolutely agree. I think just making it easy for people to just literally move your hand down the aisle, pick the vegan option, that's definitely the way to go. And it's going to turn more people vegan. So this is a more tragic version of the story that I mentioned. Here, a hunter accidentally shot and killed this young man who was he was from the UK. Oh, he's from South Wales, yeah. And he had moved to the French Alps and opened a restaurant there. And he was an avid cyclist, and he was out cycling in the woods, and he got shot and killed. And apparently, by a 22-year-old hunter. And the guy's being charged with involuntary manslaughter or something. But, here's the guy, prime of his life. He's just out trying to enjoy a bike ride, down here somewhere near Switzerland, whatever the heck this place is, Montreal. And he gets shot and killed by some idiot trying to, hunt some who knows what kind of animal, and it mistakes a guy and a bike, So said, here's the, I guess the police, the prosecutor says he couldn't be confused with game as he had a colored helmet and a colored mountain bike. So, yeah, it's just, really sad news. And, I feel bad for this guy. He's just out trying to enjoy nature, and he gets shot and killed by an idiot trying to hunt, prove his masculinity or something. I don't know. All right. Next one. There was a big brouhaha this summer. For anybody who followed the news in Australia, might you do more carnitard collateral damage? Absolutely. And it's not the first time. I mean, there's people regularly killed by hunters. Actually, I think this article even talked about this. I can't remember Oh yeah, here it is. In the past 3 years, more than 20 people have died in hunting accidents in France. Now that's just France alone. I mean, multiply that across all the countries. It's a huge loss. And think about this person's family. Think about everybody who's his friend, and like, I mean, the business he owned and all this kind of stuff. Like, there's so many people that are affected and impacted by this guy getting killed by an idiot hunter. It's just incredibly sad. Yeah, so like I was saying, here in Australia, there was a big kind of stink this summer when kind of hidden footage got released of the conditions on export ships, live export ships of animals that get sent from Australia to places like the Middle East. They are on these ships for weeks at a time sometimes, and they are in horrific conditions, extreme heat, not enough food, not enough water. The animals are like basically cooking alive, like within their own, carcasses. They're basically just, I mean, their bodies are literally getting cooked while they're still alive from the heat on the ships. And it's absolutely appalling, disgusting conditions. And there was a government inquiry, and they were going to, bring about changes and make it more humane for the animals and guarantee space for them and all this kind of stuff. They had veterinary review of the situation and all this kind of stuff, and it was looking promising for a while. And in fact, I think they did halt the exports for some time, but now it's very clearly obvious that, again, the politicians have been bought, and they are, as the article says here, sheep will again be crammed onto live export ships in an outrageous backflip by the Department of Agriculture. So again, it shows you who's paying their bills and who's telling them what to do. It says, it was rightly determined that easing the suffering of the living must be the priority. Even the Secretary of the Department of Agriculture conceded the need to move from a mortality to a welfare-based model, because they were saying, like, they were judging the success of the ships by how many of the animals were dying and trying to keep that number low. And basically they said, they have just announced a new stocking density requirement that ignores the advice of the veterinary people that reviewed it, as well as the officials from the, whatever this is, Secretary of the Department of Agriculture. And they're basically saying from November 1st, so as of a couple days ago, sheep ships sailing to the Middle East will need to increase the space on board by only 17.5% over the crowding already allowed by these standards for the export of livestock. So this again puts it in perspective here. This little graphic, you can see a sheep, and what that means is that they will get basically one A4 piece of paper size more per sheep. So they're still going to be literally stepping on top of each other and not being able to get to their food or water, and it's just ridiculous. And they're basically saying that the Australian Veterinary Association have made a recommendation. They said they've ignored scientific evidence to just have room for all sheep to lie down simultaneously, they need to double the space. So again, that's just to allow the sheep to lie down and just rest. They need to double the space, and instead they're giving them 17.5%. So instead of 200%, they're getting 17.5%. It's just absolutely mind-boggling. And yeah, it's just sad and sickening, and really kind of goes on the previous story to show you kind of like what politicians are willing to do for money. This is kind of more of the same. This article was really just talking about why and how so many chickens died in Hurricane Florence. I've talked about this in previous episodes. So you had 3.4 million chickens that got killed in the hurricane. They drowned, and this article does a great job of explaining to people why and how that can be. And they talk about the large scale, housing of these chickens, and even the free range facilities like this. You see that there's no cages here. They're just jammed into these sheds that you can't even barely see the end of. And the birds are just as, horribly confined as in the cages. It's just that they're now in big sheds instead of tiny little cages. And hey, Jen. She says, bloody Aussies. In one state, they banned greyhound racing after investigations showed large pits that were full of dead racing dogs, but it got overturned before it came into effect. Yeah, it's just crazy. I mean, wherever there's money to be made, it just seems like people will do the wrong thing. Like, you give them enough money, motivation, and they will just do the wrong thing every time. It's just sickening. So yeah, so this article I think is really good, and if anybody wants some good like stats for talking to people who are non-vegans and don't really understand kind of the magnitude of these problems or the situation, or I've seen people on like Facebook and other kind of like things like Twitter, non-vegans, even posting during the hurricane and saying like, it's a disgusting shame, like it's a travesty that these animals were left there to drown or whatever, and it's like yeah, like their deaths are horrible. It's probably no worse than the death they would have seen at the slaughterhouse, but I mean, it's just horrible. Like, I mean, drowning is probably got to be one of the worst ways to go, I would think. And but what they don't realize is that I saw lots of comments where people said like, why didn't they get moved? And the reason they didn't get moved is because it's a logistical nightmare. Like, you literally can't do it. They couldn't even save bigger animals like dogs and pets in many cases. And for doing something that's considered just a simple commodity, they just do the math. They just say like, look, it's going to cost us X amount of cents to, hatch a bunch of new chickens. They're only alive for a couple weeks. I think it's like 6 weeks or something. This article gets into the details. So they just know like, okay, well, we lost one batch. That's fine. We'll just hatch a bunch more, and, we'll be back to, running the business is fine, and dandy as it was before once we clean out the carcasses and disinfect everything. And that's what this article really does a great job of laying out, is that it makes people aware that these processing plants and these farms are holding so many chickens that it's just literally impossible to move them all. And even if it were, they wouldn't do it because it's just not economically feasible for them to do so. They're going to lose less money just wiping the slate clean with those dead animals and then just starting with another another batch. Mighty Duke asks about Proposition 12 in California, voting yes or no. I'm going to cover that. I think. Well, I don't know if I really have enough time because I really got to get going. I'll probably do that as a separate session, Mighty Duke, but just for anybody who's not aware, just a super quick like recap of that. Proposition 12 is basically talking about, it's an animal welfare kind of bill as far as I understand it. I haven't read the exact wording, I'll be honest. I've just read kind of like summaries and people's takes on it. But if I understand it right, it basically would make it illegal for animal products to be sold in the state of California unless there was a guarantee that the animals were not confined so that they couldn't turn around and stuff like that. So it would be basically like, an elimination of the farrowing crates or whatever they're called, like the gestation crates for pigs, and like calves wouldn't be allowed to, be like confined in the little hutches and stuff like that. Same thing with like the eggs wouldn't be able to be sold if they were from caged hens and all this kind of stuff. And really there's kind of a lot of like vegan drama about this too, because I think like PETA is basically encouraging people to vote no, and other animal rights groups are encouraging obviously people to vote yes. And I can kind of see both sides. One argument is that you vote yes, and if a non-vegan person sees that passes, they will then just assume that like the meat choices and animal product choices that they're getting at the supermarket are going to be humane, and they're going to be from these happy free-range animals, etc. And obviously that's not the truth, but by getting this kind of law passed into into law, this proposition would basically make them feel more comfortable in their decision, because they're thinking, well, I live in California, all the stuff sold here is like fine, it's free range. And that's what PETA's stance is, that like it's a trick, and instead let's vote no and keep getting people to go vegan. The animal rights activists are basically, many of the groups that are opposing PETA on this are saying that like, look, people are still not going to go vegan like overnight and whatever, and while people are still consuming animals, like the more kind of, I guess, less bad that we make their lives that we can, the better. And I'm kind of that mindset too. I don't think it's enough. I think it's still a horrible condition that you leave these animals in. And it is kind of a Band-Aid, and it does maybe make some people be more kind of like, like it soothes their conscience and they think that they're okay. But honestly, I would still probably vote yes, because I think, just the more of these kind of like quote unquote higher welfare standards, like the better. But, I do take an absolute, and more like a, what do you call it, an absolute view on it, that I definitely am an abolitionist when it comes to this. Like, I don't want better conditions for the animals. I want them to be left alone completely. So I certainly wouldn't stop there, but I also think it would be kind of weird to vote no on it. like, just because even the wording of it, it's like, it's a loaded question almost, like, you know, do you think that animals should be confined to some small spaces that they can't turn around? It's like, if you vote no to that, like, you know, like, that's just like, yeah, like, I don't know. So I would still vote in favor of the proposition to say that, like, yes, they should be guaranteed more space. But I can kind of see the other argument as well. Hey, Bev. Long time no see. Mostly my fault. Yeah, so let me just jump through some more stuff, and then I really got to get going, guys. This is just another, you know, Mighty Duke says rising food prices are possible. Yeah, and I think that would actually be kind of good, because if it forces, you know, the manufacturers to, you know, say, like, keep fewer animals in the same amount of space, or, you know, make bigger cages or bigger, you know, huts or whatever, then yeah, all the better for that. Like, I think, you know, make people realize that yeah, like, your meat has a really high price. They're already getting so many government subsidies, and you know, they're, like, dumping so many of their costs, like we saw with the waste, on the backs of taxpayers, like, basically suffering the ill effects of the pollution and all this kind of stuff, and, you know, the impact on the environment and these spills that they occasionally have. Yeah, like, basically, I think, yeah, make it more expensive, and then make people think more about it and make them buy rice and beans instead. Yeah, thanks, Bev. It's good to be back. Hi, Essay. Welcome. So, so yeah, this article is basically, it's another sad story. Truck overturns, you know, I don't know, whatever, hundreds or thousands of chickens are killed. And basically all the article talks about is, like, how some local neighbors came and they helped the, you know, pull out the driver of the truck, and how grateful they are, and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, it's just kind of crazy that, like, all anybody thinks about is, like, was the driver okay? It's like, well, okay, and what about the, you know, thousands of dead birds that, you know, get killed from just one truck rolling over? It's really sad. Mighty Duke, avocados are vegan. Yes, they are. I would agree, and I'm going to talk about that because I have it open on my screen somewhere. Here it is. It's next. Look at that, your mind reader. Avocados are not vegan, claims host of popular British TV show. Now, actually, just before this live stream, I had just finished watching Mike the Vegan's response to these idiotic claims, and I think just, you know, shout out to Mike. I love that channel. Anybody who's not familiar with Mike the Vegan, I'm sure you guys all are, but if you're not, just go check him out. And did a great video on this. But for anybody who's not aware, this was kind of all over the news, like, in the past couple of weeks. People just, you know, non-vegan friends of mine, or, like, people I know, were just, like, all over this, like, look at this, you know, you hypocritical vegan, you know, you're eating avocados and they're not vegan, and blah, blah, blah. Basically, they're basically just saying that a whole bunch of stuff is grown with bees that you know, you need for pollination. Excuse me. And they have, like, the bees on trucks, and they're basically shipping them around from one large monocultured farm to another. And then without doing that, you wouldn't get enough pollination, and you wouldn't be able to get your fruits and your veggies and a whole bunch of other things that that you need these you know, bees for. And it's just another kind of, like, ridiculous attempt by people fighting their cognitive dissonance to try to make themselves feel better about you know, telling you that you're not perfect either, so they're just going to keep eating their burgers and eggs and milkshakes and what have you. So that's my short and skinny take on it. But if anybody hasn't seen this, you know, please feel free to read through this. I think it's just absolutely ridiculous. And for anybody to feel better about themselves that oh, you know, vegans are, you know, the only ones causing this or whatever, like, it's just beyond ridiculous. So anyway, I just thought I'd share that. Yep, Mighty Duke says that the Facebook vegans versus carnitards groups love this argument. Absolutely. It's just another perfect way to you know, to try and, like, deflect blame and not have to think about your own actions, and just say, like, well, you're not perfect either. Never mind that they also probably eat avocado and the other things that are, you know, listed in this article, like broccoli and strawberries and I don't know, whatever else they said, cucumbers, lettuce, cherries, etc. So absolutely ridiculous. This is a good story in the way. This was actually an old article, but I just came across it like recently. This was from last year in January, so this is actually quite old. This is almost 2 years old now. But this article does a great job of talking about the impact that a single movie had on SeaWorld. So basically, if anybody hasn't seen it, there's a movie called Blackfish, and it was done by an independent filmmaker. They documented the story of Tilikum, who was a killer whale that was kept in captivity, you know, in SeaWorld. I don't think he was born in captivity. I'm pretty sure he was captured, if I remember right. Yeah, I think that's the timeline that shows as well. He was caught off the coast of Iceland. So anyway, this killer whale basically got captured and put into these stupid SeaWorld shows to amuse a bunch of people, and then because of the horrific conditions that they're kept in, and basically being kept in a bathtub all your life, these poor animals go crazy at some point. And this particular killer whale killed several people actually throughout its kind of like life at SeaWorld. And actually now I think I remember why I saw this article was because Tilikum recently died, if I remember right. So yeah, and I think that's where I got this article from. But basically, they did a whole bunch of cover-ups. They never really wanted the public to know about how these animals are kept and the kind of the suffering they experience. And this movie exposed a lot of that, and it created huge change. And SeaWorld has basically stopped breeding animals for themselves, I think, and they've also said they won't capture new ones. So all this kind of stuff, and it was a huge change, and I think that's great. And again, just shows kind of the power of social media and the power of independent people to make change. We can't wait for governments and politicians, because they're all crooked and bought and paid for by these companies, to make changes. So I think this is a great story, and it's a good article. Definitely read through this if you guys get a chance. Comments, let's see. Bev says it was on a panel show called QI and was one of the quite interesting bits of fluff presented in a show that's about bits of easier known information. Yeah, I mean, it's just like more things to kind of like delude the masses into thinking that what they're doing isn't harmful. Mighty Duke says last year was crop deaths. They need new material. Yeah, Circle of Life, Apex, all this kind of stuff. It's the same thing. People just try to make themselves feel better about their decisions. Next, we got a great article that I read. This is a bodybuilder, and she is also an animal rights activist and a Black Lives Matter. Oh, I don't know if she's in the Black Lives Matter. I actually scratched that. I don't know if she's in that. But anyway, she's basically a Black animal rights activist, and she basically makes a case that goes counter to another one of these kind of typical stupid things that people tell vegans, like, oh, why don't you care about people, or why do you care more about animals than people? Like, this was the argument that was used against me when I was debating Carnival. Like, he was basically accusing me and saying that I care more about animals than I do about people, and why don't I care about the suffering and the poor people, et cetera, et cetera. Now, there's obviously very good responses to all those things, but she is also making the same case and saying that veganism is not a privileged white thing, it's a caring thing. And she basically says that to think only white people care about health, animals, and the plants is absolutely false. And she's making the case that in the Black communities, she wants people to realize that people are not the only animals being discriminated against, and that we need to make changes. And I think it's a beautiful message, and yeah, like, kudos to her. And apparently she's a vegan chef, bodybuilder, and a animal rights activist, Nikki Ford. So check her out if you get a chance. Beautiful message. This was a just kind of non-vegan related thing, but just more like a government thing and a environmental thing. The UK is removing some of the, basically tax, I guess, like, advantages for buying hybrid cars and electric cars. So I think for the hybrids, they're removing them all together, and then for the electric cars, they're slashing the amount. So, where was it? Yeah, in 2011, they knocked off 4,500 pounds, and now that will be cut in early November by 1,000 to only 2,500 pounds to buy new hybrid cars. And I think there was another one though. Hold on. I don't remember the details on this one. Sorry, guys. But anyway, it's just something that I quickly wanted to mention, that, like, you know, it's a little bit frustrating that we have so much environmental impact, so many things like this. And, you know, I would love to see government subsidies going more towards this kind of stuff. If people are going to buy new cars, like, why not, you know, incentivize them to buy electric and hybrid instead of, you know, the gas guzzling, you know, cars of old. I would much rather see government money going to this than to, you know, things like propping up the meat processing plants and stuff like that. So just quickly wanted to share that. This one is a interesting article that talked about winemakers in Germany being happy with climate change. They're obviously, you know, it's a little bit of a attention-seeking, you know, headlines, but they do talk with the farmers, and they say they do have challenges, and there's drought and all this kind of stuff. But basically, they're saying that they're able to grow better wines and get earlier crops and all this kind of stuff because the climate is changing so drastically. And there's different types of grapes that they're able to grow that they wouldn't be able to grow except at like warmer climates, and now they're able to make more money, basically. I just thought it was an interesting take on the whole climate change kind of thing. And this is a opinion piece written by Jessica Scott Reed. I believe I mentioned her before in one of the previous you know, like newscasts. Check her out. I follow her on Twitter, and she's got great posts, great articles. She writes for a variety of different papers, opinion pieces usually, as far as I've seen. And in this one, she's talking about the recent change to the trade agreement between US, Mexico, and Canada, and how that impacts the Canadian milk market by allowing previously banned American milk that may contain RBGH, that's the bovine growth hormone, and basically that was banned by the health authorities in Canada in 1999 due to animal welfare concerns. And they're basically, you know, just she's making the case that, like, look, you know, the best way to, you know, not have to worry about any of these kind of hormones and everything is to, like, drink a plant-based dairy alternative. So kudos to Jessica. Check her out if you yeah, there's a picture of her, and I think that links to her you know, information, but you can find her on Twitter as well, and I do enjoy her articles and posts, so check her out. This one is an article about a new high-speed rail that is supposed to be getting built in the UK. And here it is. It's going to be linking London, Birmingham, East Midlands, Leeds, and Manchester. And unfortunately, it requires 350 miles of railways to be built. And it is a crazy expense. They're saying it's going to cost up to £80 billion, which is a major increase on the initial projection of £32 billion. And they're basically going to carve up the countryside to do it. They're going to displace people. They're going to displace you know, new homes that have even been built. They're going to be bulldozing stuff, and they're going to have to move a cemetery. So they're saying they're going to have to exhume 60,000 bodies. And the probably, you know, most shocking thing is that they're going to destroy 19 areas of ancient woodland, which are you know, habitat for endangered species and all this kind of stuff. And the high-speed rail itself is also going to hit and kill, you know, many animals. And as the article points out, this is probably going to only save people maybe like a couple minutes on their commute. So it's just an absolute crazy thing that something like this would be pushed through. I'm sure that some people are going to get extremely rich, you know, doing this kind of stuff, putting through these lines, but at the cost to the animals, to the people, and the environment in general, and the ancient woodlands. I mean, it's just an absolute disgrace. And generally says, yeah, no British government project has ever been on time or budget. Yeah, well, I don't think any government project has ever been on time or budget. I remember the big dig in Boston. It was supposed to be, you know, whatever it was, I don't know, like $1 billion or something, and it ended at like 8 billion or however. I mean, it's just some ridiculous amount of money over budget. And also time too, so they're late on time and money. And they basically talk about this ancient woodland, and they talk about some trees that were planted to try to offset this. So they planted a bunch of new trees, But then this summer was so dry, again, probably because of all the climate change that we've been experiencing, that the new trees that they planted just died. They did a cost analysis and they realized that it wasn't going to be worth it to water them. So they said it's not cost effective. They left 50,000 young trees, which were planted between London and Buckinghamshire, and they just all died from the drought. So it's just crazy. They're like, oh yeah, we'll just replant some more next year. What people don't realize is that, like, when you have an ancient woodland and you have a different kind of ecosystem than you have from just new trees and small trees, it's a completely different thing. This is not, the same thing. It's not equatable. So I love this quote that they end the article with. It says, perhaps HS2 would do well to bear in mind these words attributed to Alanis Obamaswin. I don't know if I pronounced that right. When the last tree is cut down, the last fish eaten, and the last stream poisoned, you will realize that you cannot eat money. And yeah, I hope people do realize that sooner than later. This one was shared from Gabe Music. I follow him on Twitter. He's got a YouTube channel. I've given him a shout out the last time. Shout out to Gabe again. Awesome stuff. Check out his beautiful song about the plight of animals. And he shared this, which was basically asking for a ban on so they wanted to have a new Greyhound Stadium in Wallyford, East Lothian. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right either. And they're basically collecting signatures. So sign this petition if you guys can and help them out. I think it would be great. Yeah, they're trying to get 15,000 signatures. They're at 11,000 now. So please, if anybody can, please sign this. I'm going to have all the links for the articles, like usual, in the comments afterward. Okay, I am like 15 minutes late. I'm going to try and speed it up. I only got a couple left, I promise. Chris O'Dowd is an actor, and he recently celebrated his 39th birthday with a vegan cake made with a social justice message. They made it in rainbow color because apparently in Ireland, some gay couple was refused a cake by a baker. And so this was kind of in retaliation for that, and had a rainbow themed cake. And he was on some TV show, and they discussed about how, meat is impacting the planet and the environment and producing greenhouse gases and all this kind of stuff. And they talked about all this kind of stuff. And they celebrated with this vegan cake for the guy. I don't know if he is vegan already or not, but maybe if somebody knows that, they can tell me. I just know this guy from there was that show, the IT Crowd. That's the only thing I know him from, but apparently I'm sure he's been in other stuff too. So if somebody knows and is a fan of Chris O'Dowd, maybe they know if he's vegan. But even if he's not, again, more mainstream attention, the better. So I absolutely love hearing this kind of stuff. And they talked about also how many more pubs are going vegan. And they also said in Ireland, they said recent data found 119% increase in vegan food delivery in Ireland. The town of Derry recently announced its first vegan festival, and a former dairy scientist launched the first Ireland-based vegan coconut yogurt line. Generally says, don't think he's vegan. So again, I almost think the fact that he's not, it almost even makes it better, because like people are going to be like, oh, this dude's not even a vegan and he's having a vegan cake. Like I wonder if there's something to this stuff. So I think it's great, and maybe he goes vegan later. Now here's somebody that is vegan, quarterback Colin Kaepernick. So Kaepernick is kind of a dividing figure for a lot of people. If anybody doesn't follow sports, I don't really follow sports. I just followed him because of kind of his social, justice views. I actually think it's great what he has done. Basically, if anybody doesn't know, he was the guy who kind of started this taking a knee during the Star Spangled Banner being played at the football games, and so he got a lot of flack for that, and then he didn't get his contract renewed and all this kind of stuff, and people have given him props for sticking to his views, and some people hate the guy and think that he's stupid and why did he throw away his career and all this kind of stuff. So I think it's great, and I think basically he's a man of principle as far as I can see, and he stood by what he thinks is a stand against police brutality and especially oppression against people of color in the U.S. So he's fighting what he believes, and what I think he's right in believing is a systemic racism that is in society, and it's ingrained, and he's trying to make people aware of that, and I think he's done a great job for that. So anyway, the fact that he's not standing for the national anthem, I think he was doing it in a very respectful manner, and especially he was like going down to a knee, like it was certainly not disrespectful in my mind. But anyway, he was recently awarded a prestigious, here it is, Webb Du Bois Medal for African and African American research at Harvard, and they recognized his contribution to basically just like making people more aware of the difficulties that people of color face in day-to-day life. So I think this was a great thing. I definitely have respect for the guy, and I really like the fact that he's vegan as well. And I think he's been vegan for a couple of years too. And I think he also became vegan because he realized that the same kind of oppression that he's struggling against and fighting against among people is the same thing that's applied to animals. So I think that's very inspirational and good. Last article, and that's it. Huge win by a vegan athlete running an ultra race and smashing the course record. I did not know about this runner before, but he is a Canadian, Alistair Gardner. Mighty Duke says Cap eats avocados. I'm sure he does, and I'm sure most people do. So this guy went out and won the Bromont Ultra 80-kilometer race, and he smashed the course record. So basically, this guy, what was it? Yeah, he's also achieved a convincing win last year, tackling a 160-kilometer course, but this time he lined up for the 80-kilometer course. And not because he couldn't run it. I mean, obviously he won the race last year in the 160, but this year he was only going to run 25K. And because he had another race, he was going to run the Philadelphia Marathon in November. But he said, the plan was to do the 25K race as a fun long run, but I had a feeling I was in good shape to have a crack at a new course record on the 80. So the day before the race, I changed my plans. So this guy, he's been training for a marathon, and then he decides, double the distance, sure, no problem. He's going to go for a course record. So the course record was previously 8 hours and 21 minutes. This guy killed it in, 7:50 something? Where was it? Yeah, he came in first at 7 hours and 53 minutes. So, I mean, that is brutal. He took a huge chunk off the course record, and people have said this is a tough race too. So there's a lot of elevation, something like 3.5 kilometers of gain. Yeah, right here. Excuse me. So, I mean, this guy is just a monster, and he killed the course record, slayed everybody, and he basically attributes it to his vegan, fueling. So he's basically eating fruit, 2 Fruit 3 energy bars. I don't know what those are, but I'm sure it's some kind of vegan energy bar, maple energy gels, and pretzels. And so this guy, he's basically saying that what allowed him to win was the good, vegan diet. So, he basically says, he turned vegan in 2010 after reading about modern farming in a series of articles by The Guardian. He was horrified to realize that he's part of the problem. And then they wanted to go to, only buying local and free range. And then he realized that, it's still the same stuff and it's still causing unnecessary suffering. And then he basically said, after 2 years, I was kidding myself, and so I stopped completely, and I've never looked back because he was still eating eggs and dairy. So the guy's been, vegan since 2012, I guess, by that math. And not only did this guy kill the course record for the 80, there was a 55-kilometer race that day as well. And another vegan, Elliot Carden, he ran that and set a course record and beat everybody there too. So 2 vegans breaking course records, winning the race, showing people how it's done. And that's all I have time for today, guys. I really appreciate everybody being on. Sorry that I went away without telling you, and I am back now. I will hopefully be doing more regular stuff like I have in the past. I just needed a little bit of a break and taking care of stuff. So that's it. I'm really sorry. I do not have time to take questions now at the end. Awesome. Appreciate everybody being on. And that's it. Thanks so much for everybody being on. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Let me stop sharing this. There we go. All right. Thanks. Bye, everybody.